Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at the new Metal Hurlant. This is a relaunch of the magazine. It surprisingly happened at the same time that Heavy Metal relaunched. I just recorded a video of this. Don't know what order I'll be putting them up in. But it was interesting to get them both like within a week of each other and be able to compare the approach because they're both relaunching. They're both obviously relaunching basically the same thing. I mean, obviously Metal Hurlant came first and then birthed Heavy Metal, but same aesthetic, same vibe, same basic, approach to what these books are about. So it's interesting to see how they do it. I feel like Heavy Metal was pushing forward, including more new artists. Metal Hurlant, I don't know if this is just because it's a celebration issue or this is how they're going to approach these magazines going forward, but it has more of a mix of old classics and new work. You can see that the Metal Hurlant's twice the size or bigger. I don't know if that's going to continue or if this is just an oversized first issue. They both went through Kickstarter. This one I was able to get a really nice hardcover new release of Moebius's Arzak. Not going to do on the video on that. Plenty of people have done videos on that and everyone knows Moebius and his work. But that came with this. So this was a really cool campaign. And I think it was this campaign that I was able to back for a year-long subscription. Maybe it was the Heavy Metal. Maybe I don't remember. But I think this one I got the subscription, and Heavy Metal I wanted to see what it looked like first. So we'll go through this. It's pretty packed. It's also because it's the first issue. They're doing a lot of contextualization of the history of Metal Hurlant. I don't know how much of that will continue in the articles and all that stuff. I don't know how those are going to look in future episodes, future volumes of the Metal Hurlant. But a cool mix. So this first story here, this is by Jake Thomas and George DeVoe. This is obviously a framing sequence and a tribute to the impact that Metal Hurlant had. So you have a character in a fantasy world going in, and there's this big tomb here that says Droulet, Moebius, Dunet, and Verkas. They open that up and find this treasure trove of old Metal Hurlants and an old sword. So it's kind of like in the Heavy Metal movie where you got the comment going and it's kind of goes other places and creates the framing sequence for the story. We come back to this in the end. So pretty typical there. Really nice art in here by George DeVoe. Kind of gets that old Heavy Metal feeling. I think it is computer colored, but it made to look more like hand painted. Lots of cool hatching and all that type of stuff you expect. So I always like seeing people who are keeping the feel of those original magazines and paying homage to that, updating a little bit, making their own of it, and that's really going on here. Then throughout this magazine, we get like the new stuff juxtaposed, or the new stuff juxtaposed against old stuff. So here we have a reprint of a famous Droulet piece. It's really hard not to compare the new stuff to the old stuff as you're going, and it's hard not to see kind of the vim and vigor of the original stuff compared to the new stuff. Like there's just a certain freshness and energy to the older work that I feel like a lot of the newer work still doesn't have because it's so indebted to this. This has that like the vibrancy of the original impulse coming through, and you can see why it shattered people's minds. Especially I started reading this and was having a hard time, and I said, okay, I got to go get stoned out of my mind and read this as if I was a teenager, reading this in the 70s when it first came out. So I went and smoked a bowl and sat down and immediately was like, holy shit, this is so cool. And Droulet is someone I've always liked the way it looks, but it's a little intense for me. The lettering's really hard to read, but in that proper stoned mindset, I super sucked in, loving it and like really getting that energy. The compositions are awesome. It's almost like a proto J.H. Williams type of thing going on. So really cool in that sense. And it was very hard not to compare that vibrancy of the old stuff to some of the more standardized new stuff that's in here. Another reprint, another one of these ones where you're looking at the stuff that was in the original Metal Hurlant and you're like, fuck, come on, how is anyone supposed to live up to this? Like, I wouldn't want to be put in a book next to, you have a Droulet and then you have a Deneau and Gall piece here. And Jean-Claude Gall is just fucking amazing with texture. It almost looks like too overly rendered when you first look at it. It looks like that very tight kind of Hal Foster Prince Valiant rendering. It looks like Prince Valiant gone mad, but then the closer you look, like all that texture is dry brush and things aren't over rendered. There's a lot of actually calligraphic mark making and stuff. It's just happening so small that it looks really tight nonetheless. But the art is absolutely amazing, and the texture work that he's doing in here. And this is stuff where, you can't just go take a photo of this. You can get some photo reference of the general type of thing, but this is someone making up a world, but with the level of like detail and veracity going on that it feels photo referenced, even though there's no way. It's just absolutely astonishing work. So yeah, it's like, I don't know. I feel bad for any of the newbies coming in. Like, how are you going to live up to this? But I'm really glad that now I've seen this stuff in like scans of these magazines, but I've never seen it in print. It's printed beautifully. They obviously have access to the original artwork or really good negatives or something. So even though this is reprinted material, I personally am really excited to have my hands on a print version of this. I feel like some people who have all the old magazines might be griping a little bit about how much is reprinted material. But for people like me who don't have those, it is a pretty nice thing. I'll talk more about that at the end, though, because I'm still not sure about that strategy as a strategy for the magazine. A lot of the newer pieces seem to be more like tribute pieces or pieces that are purposely following up what came before it. So like you have the Jean-Claude Gall piece where it's got all these rocks and things. Then you'll have a little piece that there have some articles. So talking about, Jean-Pierre Denot as the editor there, giving some of the history, the Jerry Frisson's giving some of the history of the magazine and talking about working with that editor, and then setting up some context about what the next piece in the book is going to be. So setting up some context about what this piece here is all about. And obviously this is like a surreal tribute to Denot. Sorry if I'm pronouncing these names wrong. That's kind of how a lot of the newer stories in this work, either responding to the article that came to them before or to the older piece of work that came before. So that's really fun and cool, but I also feel like maybe it hampers the new artists and that they're a little still purposely stuck in the past, but that maybe is just, this tribute issue, hopefully. Then we have very famous early Moebius piece. They do an article in here talking about this is like one of the earliest pieces where Moebius is really being Moebius and working in that style, in that mode. I particularly love this spread here about all of these monsters coming up to the guy in the mud and all the flock, 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 as they're walking along and him crawling up the rock here and all the flock, 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 flock coming up at him. Again, I was reading this pretty stoned on purpose, so that had a lot of real animation to it, and the sound effects and stuff were playing out in my head a little bit more. And as much as I like Moebius, it just really made me love him even more. There's that cinematic vibe to it. So another one that I've seen digitally, but now I have a really nice print copy of it. That's followed up by a piece by James Stokoe. Stokoe's stuff is awesome, super in line with the heavy metal aesthetic, super detailed ink, super imaginative. Obviously someone that Brandon has worked with. I think Brandon's one of those guys that has the heavy metal just built in Metal Hurlant built into his genetics, and most of the artists that Brandon likes and collaborates with also just have that real dense saturation in those vibes, and I feel like are the people who take what's done in heavy metal and have updated it the most, like within the spirit, but created something new with it. So really excited to see that. Always excited to see Stokoe work. This is one of those ones too where it's obviously got some computer coloring in it, but it's done to look a little more like the old hand painted stuff. So I like that aesthetic as well. Then we jump back to a classic, the old classic piece by Luc and Francois Schweten, I'm sure a lot of people have seen this. I think it's called carapaces, where you've got these people in a world that are in these suits, and they finally get out of the suits and touch each other. Little sexier and more explicit as old school heavy metal. But anytime you got anything by Schweden, I'm on board. It's beautiful work. And again, something I've seen before, but never in print. And it's beautifully printed, perfect quality. Then we have what looks like a newer story to me. This is by Nicola Pisarev. It's basically like a Gattaca story where they start talking about genetically perfect babies, people that are doing like test tube babies. So that's the basic premise of it. It's meant to look painterly. It's done digitally. So stylistically, like, it just has a bit of that digital schlock to it to me, but there's some images like this that look really nice. It's just one of those things where, like, when I'm looking at the Dano or the Gal, and then I look at some of the more modern stuff like this, it just doesn't have that same like urgency and vivacity to it that some of the earlier stuff did. This story, also by Jan Becu and Masha Moran, feels very modern to me. It's like good art, but it feels very homogenized. It doesn't feel like any particular style. The computer coloring, even though it's flat colors, doesn't really help with that. So, I mean, that's always going to be the case in an anthology, and was the case in the old heavy metals. There's plenty of stuff that's just forgettable and that you could skip over. And that's how I feel about, not all, but a lot of the modern stuff in here is it's just too predictable. Also, when you're dealing with like sci-fi, and I said this, I think, about the heavy metal one too, sci-fi, horror, that kind of stuff, all of the tropes have played out since the early EC days, at least, going back even further than that, but especially in like the anthology format where you've got 8 to 10 pages, and it's really hard to tell a new good 8-page sci-fi story. A lot of this stuff just gets a little bit like, yeah, people in space, but there's nothing really hooking me to it anymore, unfortunately. Then we get another early Moebius piece. This is according to and here you can see some of the essays that they've got. But this one, called The Detour, according to the essays, this was like the first real, like, where he skipped away from working in that Blueberry style and developed the Moebius style, and you can see where the Robert Crumb underground art influence is coming in, but being mixed with the fantasy, but picking up on the rendering. So just another one of those. Of course, I've seen this. I've seen digital scans of this, but seeing it in print is amazing. Seeing an image like this where, like, holy cow, that's a whole classical painting. Just, I mean, so much details in there. You see why, again, that this kind of intensity of this blast that came out of these original creators is just really hard to match. Even, it talks in here, but Moebius, there's somewhere in here saying, Moebius is even talking about, some artists just have this burst really early that's then hard to ever match again later in life. And even though Moebius has gone on to constantly make great work, I think a lot of us will agree that there's just something about this original burst of Moebius art that's just hard to surpass even by his own later work. At least in my opinion. I just really enjoy this stuff. So very grateful to have a print copy of it. It's so well done and cool to see. Like, these, I guess, according to the essays in here, kind of the first 2 stories that Moebius did working in this mode. So I'm hoping that eventually we'll get, all of those early Moebius stories in these magazines. But also, why not just collect them all as a Moebius collection instead of interspersed with all of this other stuff? And I'll loop back to that thought in my final thoughts. This is followed up by a piece by Killefer. Killefer is a contemporary artist, but someone who's just really fascinating. Again, developed his own particular style. Obviously is working with some computer coloring and computer effects, but has developed something personal in particular with it. I really like a lot of what's going on this page. A lot of this stuff looks like it would print very well as like a risograph. This may be even done with just the CMYK, I think, as almost treating it like spot colors behind the black to create the colorization. So this is something, I think would look really sexy on a thick matte paper. I think some of these colors would look really nice, give you more of like a screen print look to it. But yeah, some really gorgeous stuff going on here. So it's not that none of the modern creators are producing stuff equivalent to the old people. I think someone like Killefer is just as good as a Moebius or a Droulet. One of the things that I do like about the more modern work is it is less like, and I guess the metal Hurlant's not as much as the heavy metal, but there's a little bit less like fucking blow everything up and titties and cum and dicks all over the place. It's like we've evolved our content a little bit. And someone like Killefer has all the artistic merit of the early stuff and all the vivacity and the uniqueness and pushing those themes instead of just repeating them, but also like adjusting to something that's like has some contemporary awareness to it. Another reprint here. This is written by Edith Za and illustrated by Nicole Claveau. I've talked about this piece, The Green Hand, because I got a collection of Nicole Claveau's art, and this piece was printed in there. So I've seen this one before, but again, something that's just really in that classic heavy metal style. Almost feels coloration-wise and style-wise like some of the early Kazaa stuff, or Sazaa, I don't know how to pronounce these names. But really like this one, read it before. That's the problem with some of this reprint material, is I have this in a collection of this artist's work, and I wonder if that might not be a better way to treat some of the older stuff. I think this is a newer one by Ellen Houston. It's called Nightmare Hotel, and it is like this gigantic nightmare world hotel. This all looks hand painted, and it just really has some awesome color stuff going on with it, awesome design and shape stuff. And this is the kind of stuff that excites me. I think this is a newer artist. This is the kind of stuff that excites me from newer creators, is people who are still working with hand done materials, people who have the more artistic sensibility. I feel like that's what the original Metal Hurlant did, is they brought back some of like that illustrative quality to things. They brought back some of that awareness of fine art. I feel like the European artists have always remained aware of their legacy in fine art and classical painting and that kind of stuff. Now you have artists bringing in, obviously, someone like Ellen Houston here is bringing in a lot of like modernist painting ideas, and I really like that. There's, it's kind of some like Metodi-esque ways that things move around with the lines. So really excited about that type of work, and that's what I would hope there's more of in the future and less of like the computer colored sci-fi stuff, Kevin Sullivan wrote this one, and then it's illustrated by Simon Leclerc. This one, even though it has the computer done stuff, this is a kind of computer colored art I really do like, where there's the flat colors. They're really using like shape as, shape. It doesn't always have to have a line around it. It can still look kind of painted, or it kind of has a pastel look to it. The line work is mixed in, but it's not surrounding everything. So it feels more like a fully considered particular style, where someone really understands all the elements of art, and they're not just doing, because everyone does computer coloring. It really seems like a tool they're using here. And again, kind of out of the standard style for heavy metal, something that feels a little bit more grounded but still has a fantastical element, keeping the original Metal Hurlant vibe but pushing it forward. Again, these modern stories also rely less on the bombastic guns everywhere and tits and all of that stuff, so I like that. It's just finding the ones in there that someone's really being an artist with a particular voice versus someone who's just kind of another sci-fi artist. Interesting to see the kind of manga influence coming in this piece by Yuri Campos, one of these, like Sean calls him, an international artist, someone who has some European vibes. There's definitely some manga vibes in here. There's the dot tones, but then there's also some coloring going on. Obviously it's computer done, but it's another one of those where it doesn't look schlocky doorknob coloring. It's a tool rather than a crutch. So a lot of really interesting stuff going on in here. I particularly like that, there's these just even though it kind of just looks like it could be done black and white, There's these little bits of like creamy colors in there, even though it's monochrome, but then still getting the dot patterns on there. Just kind of adds some new elements, kind of pulling from here and pulling from here and putting them together in a way I'm not used to seeing is pretty cool. And then I like this bit of writing right here too. You can obsess with the dark and go inside it, merging yourself with the gap. But I must tell you, I've never heard of anyone who has returned. And that's what I'm saying, that like the news stories in here, the really good ones, tend to be a little bit more quiet, a little bit more contemplative, not so over the top explosions everywhere. And I like that. I think a lot of people might dislike that because they're coming to Metal Hurlant or heavy metal expecting heavy metal. But I think sci-fi has just kind of updated itself in that direction, and the magazines that are smart, the anthologies, will follow suit with that. There's some articles in here also celebrating the big names. So this is an article by the owner of Metal Hurlant, Fabrice Giger, talking about the influence that Jodorowsky had on sci-fi in general, and especially heavy metal and Metal Hurlant and Moebius and all of those. There was, for those of you who have been following the Jodorowsky library reviews I do, you'll notice that I started getting really disenchanted with Jodorowsky because it's always rape, always rape, always rape. And not just rape as like a classic theme. A lot of people in the comments have said, well, he's just using classic themes and stuff. But he really celebrates it over and over, calls it sacred over and over. In the Jodorowsky's Dune documentary, he talks about rape in a really positive way, and he's like giggling and like, yeah, and then you raping, and that's kind of what got me looking at his work a little bit more critically, is rewatching that documentary. In the documentary, he talks about drugging people. He talks very explicitly about manipulating his artists to get what he wants out of them. So it really turned me off to Jodorowsky. I got rid of most of his work that I have. I quit doing the reviews. Reading through this article, it was then interesting to hear, I'm going to read this bit by Fabrice Giger that kind of reinforces again that very combative, predatory nature of Jodorowsky. He says, his first words, even before greeting me, were a question. My age, 23, I replied, meeting the piercing gaze of the man before me, 36 years my senior, his charismatic face framed by a salt and pepper beard. The ensuing conversation turned into a battle of wills, with him trying to penetrate my mind and me resisting. After 2 intense hours, we parted, neither side having been victorious nor vanquished, only the conviction that this exchange would form the foundation of a lasting collaboration. If this partnership, currently in its 37th year, has had its intense moments, today I can only feel deep gratitude towards the artist and tender affection for the man. So obviously he says, I find this to be a valuable relationship, but that's just another one of those things that, to all the evidence I've seen, adds up to the sense that I get that Jodorowsky is a very predatory person, and his career, it seems like to me, the more I look at it, obviously has a great imagination, but if he didn't have the great taste in the artists and he wasn't so good at getting them to work with him, I really think no one would care about Jodorowsky in comics so much as they do if he wasn't working with the artists he worked in. So I'm really souring on my relationship with Jodorowsky and his work over the last year. That wasn't helped by the follow-up story here that's written by Jodorowsky and drawn by an artist named Ines. It's basically just a 4-page pissing contest, and like Jodorowsky's trying to tell some wisdom in that, but it just comes down to like a very kind of simple thing at the end where it's just like, I know how to pee far. So I don't know. I'm really having a hard time lately with Jodorowsky and his stuff. And then in this one where he's not attached to any kind of spectacular artist, it's really it's easier to see through it, I think, to the just like of what Jodorowsky is. Then a tribute piece by Durf Back Durf, really fun thing here where the Moebius little Arzak concrete pelican comes in and poops out a bunch of Metal Hurlants and smacks Durf in the face. I think that's probably how a lot of people feel the first time they see a Metal Hurlant or a heavy metal. I know it blew my mind the first time I saw one. So that's just a fun tribute piece there. They're doing a good job pulling in some like bigger name modern creators. I like that they're doing that. Like this piece is written by Matt Fraction, someone who I Matt Fraction is someone who his work either really lands for me or I find him really fucking obnoxious. This one was more of like a standard obnoxious one. I didn't feel like he was doing anything particularly special in this. And then there's really nice art in it by Afif Khaled, but again, it has that like modern computer colored thing to me that even though it's obviously competent work, it just kind of in my mind homogenizes with everything else. But I like that they're pulling around, you know, big American writers, big European artists. It really seems to have the global appeal that this magazine should. I'm not sure about this, if this is a newer one or an older one. The artist is named Alias. It feels very much like an old heavy metal thing, but that might just be the style and the black and white, so I'm not sure. And then there's another, but kind of more modernized story with the computer coloring and everything here called Retrograde by Carla Pacheco with art by Sagar. I like the pencil style in this one. You know, it's a little more particular. But again, one of those ones that feels kind of just like a standard sci-fi story. I do quite like the composition on this page, but to me the story is a little silly again, where this woman's like fucking this cloud or something like that. Very in line with heavy metal, but content-wise, not that interesting to me. Another strange, I think to me, attempt to include big names in this is a reprint of a 2020 interview with Alan Moore. Alan Moore being another person that hadn't really played out on the channel because we just didn't record him, but Tori and I were going to start recording Promethea read-throughs and very quickly realized that that book is also very rapey. Like Alan Moore basically uses the Jack Faust character as a glamour for himself to go in and have sex with his own creation. And the more we read that book, the more my kind of couple years long like reevaluation of Alan Moore not being as good as I always thought he was, like kind of bringing him down in my opinion over the last few years, was solidified by trying to reread Promethea. And then coming and reading this article as well, there was just some stuff in here where that cranky, he thinks everyone, you know, like owes everything to him, was coming through. But also a weird, like the interviewer seems to be trying to get Alan Moore to throw like modern social justice movements under the bus. They keep coming back to like censorship, especially, and using the term SJW, social justice warrior. And Alan Moore's like, hey, you know, fuck off, like I'm a longtime anarchist. So it's a weird, tense interview. But then there's also stuff in here where he goes on and on and on about how much of a feminist he is. And that was just really strange to me because I've spent the last couple months talking with Tori about how turned off she is by Alan Moore's work, reading it. He doesn't know how to write women, like she can't relate to the women characters. He seems creepy and pedophilic and rapist and all of this stuff. And that, I know that's an accusation that a lot of other people have had against him. And then to hear him constantly going over it, reading some of those things to her, she was like, I just don't think this guy really knows what's coming through in his writing. So this is another one of those things that like has downgraded Alan Moore for me. A weird addition to this magazine, I think, to stuff this in. I think they're just trying to get some big names in there, but Alan Moore's not someone I ever associated with this lineage of comics, so it really seems like an overreach to put him in here. Kind of strange. I don't know how this one was made. It looks like mostly digital art, but maybe some physical stuff. I'm not sure. There's some interesting stuff going on in the art here. Like this almost at first looks like an adjusted photograph, but then the closer you look, there's a lot of abstraction going on. So an interesting art that kind of had me picking apart how it was made. This is by Homero Rios, and then the art's by Lino Carvalho, I think is the last name. Cool, like it in black and white. That makes this kind of stuff easier for me than the computer colored stuff. Really nice piece, more modern piece here by Peter Sneiberg, an artist that I respect and like a lot of stuff, really particularly like these drawings of the big jellyfish. But again, you know, a little bit of that slick computer colory stuff going on. But this was one of the more enjoyable ones. Then an heavy metal OG, probably actually my favorite heavy metal OG, even maybe more than Moebius personally, because Zaw's work has always, especially the early stuff, has just really landed with me. And you can see here a lot of that same type of mark making his Moebius, but I like this one. It's got all the extra stippling, almost like a Virgil Finlay feel to it. Again, another one of those ones that I've seen this before in scans and whatnot, but to have a perfectly reproduced copy of it that I can hold is really, really nice and lovely. More modern piece by Yang Wei Lin. Don't know if this is new or old. I'm assuming it's new. Kind of looks like a children's book thing by the artist Pim Bose. I like this one. I like the pencil, and it looks like it may be digital color, but it kind of has a watercolor feel to it. It's cool. It's very different for heavy metal. Metal Hurlant, I should say. Another one that I don't know if it's new or old. I'm not familiar with this, but it's by Picaret and Nicolay, or the artists. Really interesting hand-painted style. Something about the color choices and everything on this is really gross and off-putting, but in a way that works with the story. It's supposed to be kind of icky and gross. So yeah, there's like a weird, almost like kind of not quite as good, but pretty Richard Corbin-y vibe to it. I've always found Richard Corbin's stuff to be a little icky. It works for his art, but same thing for me, a little icky on these, but I like it. Again, it has that old heavy metal. Matthew Allison, someone who I think does a really good job of modernizing the heavy metal aesthetic, a very kind of RoboCop thing going on in this one. And then a piece I really liked by Fred Blanchard, again, a little bit more modern, but really nice. It looks like pen and ink with ink wash and then some flatter coloration over top of it. This really, really nice red monolith against all of the blue back here, I think is a really, really beautiful look. And this one also has some of that, obvious homage to Arzak and Moebius and that kind of stuff. So it feels like someone who is really consuming the old stuff and turning it into their new thing. And then we wrap back around to that opening sequence and cap off the book with that coming back to the sword. And then we get some credit back here to all the backers. My name's in here somewhere, yay. And then, like I said, it was a subscription, so I'm pretty sure that I'll be getting the next 3 of these so we can look at those and see how the mix of articles and new and old work goes as they continue forward with this project. The one thing that I've hinted at a couple times is that with stories like this one by Nicole Clavieux, I have this in a book somewhere, so the reprint is like, I don't know, that's kind of just a waste for me. The other thing is, like I keep going back to, it's so nice to have like a print version of these things. But if they have the rights to print this stuff, I think it might be more marketable, and it would definitely be preferable to me as a collector. Instead of buying these magazines, I know you're using the old heads to try and sell the new kids, but I would rather see the magazines be all high quality new stuff and then give me a complete Moebius, like give me the library of Moebius, so I'm not grabbing all of these, and this is well printed on nice paper, but give it to me in a hardcover collection. It's not spread out between a bunch of magazines, interspersed with some things that I like, some things that I don't like. Give me the complete heavy metal works of Moebius. Give me the complete Kazaa. Give me the complete, whatever you have the rights to that's not already printed. I don't know what it would be holding them back from doing a collection of it. Give me the complete Schweden. There's too many artists that did too much classic work. There's stuff like the Gal stuff. I would love to see reprints of all of that. I got the one that he did with Jodorowsky, but it's Jodorowsky. Let me see all the other stuff. So the Burton and Side that was in the heavy metal, those kinds of things, collect them and then let the magazine just be the new stuff. So that's my biggest complaint, but it's also like, if they're not going to collect it, then I am really grateful to have print versions of these things. So I'm a little on the fence. I'm grateful for what this is, but I don't think it's the best thing that they could be doing with the properties they have, but also I don't know if there's some limitations on their ability to collect this stuff. Like, it can't be all in a Moebius book. It has to be in a heavy metal or Metal Hurlant magazine. I'm not sure, but It's something that really I think the industry and the medium deserves, is some good libraries of some of these people rather than just scattered reprints. So an interesting project, something I'm looking forward to see how it's going, something that I definitely enjoyed looking through and slobbering over, but something that I think has, some things that need to be considered about the presentation as well.